Sisters and brothers, ladies and gentlemen, friends, neighbors, comrades, all citizens of the world. Wherever you're going, wherever you've been.
Welcome back, you citizens of the world. It's live from the Heartland. I'm Michael James, and everybody knows that we are in the heat of an election season. It's talked about as being the most meaningful and important election in our lifetime, and for me, that's a lot of years. There's a lot of talk about voter suppression. Our next guest is the incomparable, the one and only David Orr, the man who brought Illinois motor voter, early voting rights, LGBT marriage, tenant Bill of Rights, did a lot of great work for the masses here in Chicago and Cook County and beyond. And he oversaw many elections and made sure that the vote was fair and everything was carried out on the up and up. So with all this talk of voter suppression and voting rights, et cetera, I thought it'd be a good time to get our friend and neighbor David back on. And here we are. So good day to you, David.
Well, thank you, Michael. Good to be here.
There's all these horror stories about voter suppression, things going on. In Georgia, we've heard a lot about nefarious ways to try to block the vote or to make it problematic after the vote is taken. How about giving us a little overview of how you see the question of voter suppression and its impact on this upcoming election?
Okay, let me first link it with something else that, the pundits are all talking about how close the race is, and some polls have Harris up, some polls have Trump either up or in a tie. One of the things that they do agree on is that Harris has a very solid ground game. On the other night on the news, there were some experts who've been following the Trump campaign that said basically he didn't have the ground game. He basically has the voter suppression game. So in other words, one is trying to get out as many votes as possible. The other is trying to deprive certain people of their votes. But let's look at this, because the certain people, in this case, try not to be partisan, but it's Trump is the team that seems to be pushing the voter suppression. Okay, and they've gotten much more sophisticated than 4 years ago. Sophisticated means they've got to those nuances in election law where it's not always real clear cut. And that's what they're taking advantage of. For example, in Florida, not Florida, but in Georgia and many other places, they're trying to do a number of things, but Georgia's unique in trying to do a hand count. Now, this goes back to people being pretty angry about machines, not trusting machines, although we trust the machines to buy our products every day and do the calculations of how much we owe. We had this back when I was clerk. We had a number of people that were really concerned about the direction of elections. And we actually let them do a hand count at one point. They did a hand count. It wasn't official, but they had, and again, no offense, they're good people, but they had a really hard time agreeing. Someone would get 112 to 75, then they'd get 115 to 78, but basically they couldn't really get it very well, whereas the automatic or the technical responses were always right on. That doesn't mean we should blindly trust our new technology machines, but it shows how difficult that is. So when they get to these nuances I'm talking about, is that you could really slow up an election. If I understand Georgia right, they're only going to be doing a total count. Now, a hand count is fine if you're in a place like Bangladesh. I once traveled to Bangladesh to be an election observer. Bangladesh only had one ballot. It's either Michael James or David Orr. One of us was going to be president, okay? And they sat down in a particular precinct, and afterwards they threw all the ballots on the floor, which weren't a lot, and then you count mine and I count yours, and when we come to agreement, we both have the right amount, we've got it. But when I say we need to understand there's a lot behind the elections that the deniers and the suppressionists don't tell us. For example, we have many ballot styles. We have 112 ballot styles in the Chicago ballot or the Cook County ballot. That means it's not just Michael versus David for president. It's all these other races, including local races, the school board races now, and judges, dozens and dozens of judges. And so that's where it gets tricky if you really want a hand count of all those. So that's just one example of many things. when I say they're getting more sophisticated, let's talk about challenges, okay? People have a right to challenge a candidate. Michael, I know Michael James, and he's not Michael James. People have the right to do that at a polling place. They can be election watchers. But here's where the subtleties come in which they're trying to get rid of subtleties and basically put their people in who would do this. If in Chicago or Cook, if somebody challenges, they challenge you and the next person, I'll say, I know, well, wait a second, where's your evidence? And so sooner or later, that person's going to say, we're not going to listen to you anymore because you don't have valid challenges. A lot of the challenges going on, particularly in big Democratic counties around that, they're challenging hundreds and thousands of voters, okay, saying they're not really who they say they are, in many cases without proof. So these things are where it gets very tricky, and that's where you really need to have good judges. You need to have nonpartisan judges. I mean, at least Democrats, Republicans, that hopefully balance out. But there's a lot more going on. But that's the key to it. That if there's vague areas, like in Georgia, this could really disrupt the election, and they could say, "Hey, we don't have time now." Or we want to challenge this or that. So there's a lot of reasons that they're doing this. Most of it is to cause confusion, chaos, or deny certain people from voting.
David, what are different ways that the vote can be suppressed? Ones that you know about, even hypothetical.
Well, I just mentioned a couple that I think are going to be big this fall. One is the challenges. There's already thousands of challenges already done by certain election workers, okay? If you have lots and lots of those, and you've got chaos because you're doing a hand count, and you don't have a lot of time, you can see where people say, well, now I've got an election board, which is no longer fair. Remember, they created a new election board with different people. So even the Secretary of State in Georgia, Republican, and the Attorney General in Georgia, Republican, both say this is nuts. Furthermore, you don't do these kind of changes at the last minute. Elections are supposed to be thought out well in advance. So you've got the people challenging people. You've got this now Georgia with its hand count. You've got other places where there's all sorts of different little tricks. They tried to do something recently in Nebraska, and that failed. There's almost no state where they're not trying to do certain kinds of voter suppression. Iowa, and as we realize how close this election is, any amount of voter suppression, like I say, for example, back in Georgia again, they want to do special investigations into certain counties. Well, it turns out the county they're most interested in is Fulton County, Georgia, which happens to be where Atlanta is. Okay, so it's a never-ending battle. We've defeated a lot of these things legally if there's time to legally do it. But like I say, they're getting more sophisticated. So I would say that's a big worry for me come to November.
I think, like in the Georgia case, I'm not sure what the ability is to challenge this decision that they have for a hand count. As you pointed out, the governor and the attorney general, both Republicans, have opposed it. But there's this new board, and they went ahead with it. And to my understanding, I'm not sure if it goes to the Georgia Supreme Court or all the way on up to the U.S. Supreme Court, but that doesn't afford us a lot of fairness in a lot of ways these days. Any take on that?
No, I don't know which way it's going to go. I do know there's people that believe there's a good chance because of both the elected officials I mentioned and the legal precedent that some of these changes will be defeated in Georgia, for example. The one in Nebraska was recently defeated. I can tell you exactly what's going on in Iowa. It's that they're looking for every opportunity. So there will be lots of legal challenges between now and Election Day. Some will be going on right during the election and some right afterwards. Remember, Trump tried to discourage dramatically voting by mail. Okay. And one of the things he used to say is that everybody should have to have their ballot in by election day or it shouldn't count. Now, again, sounds reasonable unless you know the history. Okay. For example, as county clerk, I knew that lots of people mailed their ballot. If election day was, let's say, the 5th or something, they mailed their ballots often by 6 or 7 days ahead of time, but they didn't arrive till days afterwards. Okay. Those voters should not be deprived the right to vote if they mailed it before election day. Okay, that's the key. And in most states, like in Illinois, you have 2 weeks to finalize your vote because there are mistakes made. There's confusion on certain things, and you have to certify. You've got to confirm that all your ballots are accurate. So let me just give you another example in the real world with things that happen. It's election day, and let's say your machine breaks down, or so the battery goes out for a while, or the electricity in the building goes out for 20 minutes. Okay, now people don't stop voting. What they'll do is they'll keep voting, and let's say in that 20-minute period, they get 20 votes or 40 votes. The judges are instructed to put those ballots, okay, in a separate compartment, which is prepared for, and then at the end of the day, feed those into the machine, okay? But you can see how some person who wasn't very sophisticated election-wise, we say, look at what they're doing. They're shoving stuff in the machine at the end of the day, and all they're really doing is taking those 20 or 40 voters that were deprived of the right because electricity went out. So that's why most jurisdictions have about 2 weeks, okay? And in Illinois, we gave people up to 2 weeks. I saw FedExes that were mailed a week before the election that didn't arrive by election day. FedExes. Okay, so most of these things they're very rational. Democrats and Republicans generally agree with it across the country. But now with these new fanatics, mostly coming from the Trump campaign, all bets are off.
David, let me raise another possibility, is that question of intimidation. I was reading in the paper this morning about Portage County, Ohio, where the Elections Board has barred the sheriff's office from providing security during early voting after the sheriff, a guy named Bruce Zuchowski, who was the sheriff, he's a Republican, urged people to collect the addresses of residents displaying yard signs for Vice President Kamala Harris. Right. And we hear about that. We hear about, gunshots. We hear, just a lot of intimidation. Can you address that a little bit?
Well, again, that's more common, particularly if you're from a big city like Chicago with the old machine. Okay, the machine is not what it once was, but the machine always had intimidating. You happen to know my wife from a long time ago was beaten up by an election judge because they were challenging something down on Kenmore Winthrop right here in Chicago. There's lots of ways to intimidate. So by looking where people are coming from, meaning where they might have a Harris poster in their front yard, those are the people that you might want to go after election day. And you could threaten them by saying, we're going to challenge you. We know you don't really live here. Racism plays a big part in it. Okay, sometimes people are going door to door and say, we know this is really not you. And so if you go to the polls, you'll be in trouble. There's all sorts of intimidation. I feel in some ways like having that experience of having to fight the old machine in Chicago and Cook County, it gave me a great understanding of some of the Trump people, not all Republicans, but some of those Trump people, because basically they're Verdoliaks on the right. I hate to put it like that, but they're kind of like our machine folks, but they were right-wing, not centrist or whatever you might call Verdoliak or Burke.
Well, speaking of elections here in Cook County, our producer, sometimes host, your good friend Katie Hogan, she always said that with you overlooking Cook County elections, she felt a lot of confidence. She's afraid that cheating may make a comeback. So what should a regular citizen be on the lookout for in maintaining fraud-free elections?
I think try and find their best source of information about elections. For example, one group, League of Women Voters, a nonpartisan group, they've got the city chapter, they've got chapters in a lot of suburbs and so forth. It's just an example. League of Women Voters always provided lots of election judges. You could also be an election judge yourself. And again, election judges are not meant to be, pro one candidate or another. It's okay if they got their opinions, they just can't function that way on election day. Or you could be a watcher. You can be an official watcher and try and you might alert. Like, let's say you're a watcher on November 5th here or in Georgia, and you see something going on where the same person comes up with no evidence and is challenging black voter after black voter. Okay. And a lot of times they're in a hurry, they got family or whatever. So okay, forget it. I'm not going to vote. That person could immediately get on the phone to people, okay, who are already identified before the election about who can help or who can immediately come to a polling place, either an official of the election board or another person. So it's hard to predict. It's just that the more you know about these things, the things that you brought up, in Ohio recently and in some of the states we're talking about, the more we know. And by the way, in fact, you told me, I think that sheriff has been replaced.
Yeah, they did. They voted that he can't oversee.
So the key is trying to get the information. Elections are a little complicated to understand some of the things that I'm talking about today and why they are the way they are. But read up on a little bit or call a group like the League of Women Voters or whatever might be a good group in your particular neighborhood. Volunteer to act, talk to your friends, find out if they've had any problems with registering. One of the things that the anti-suppression people are doing is they're checking with people who've had any problems with registrations. That's usually a big area, danger area, and making sure that everything's, T's are crossed and I's are dotted. So those things all help. So surprisingly, they help more when you can provide confidence to those people who are nervous. They haven't voted before. There might be a young person, or they might be African-American and feel like something's not quite right.
David, I'm going to switch here to a little bit to the Electoral College. And, Nate Cohen is someone we looked to in the last presidential election, and he had a lot of people, observing what he was thinking and talking about. He's not been quite as in favor these days, but he did write just recently that Donald Trump's advantage in the Electoral College might be shrinking. And we do know that the Electoral College, that it has, the rural vote has a lot more weight than those of us in the city. The 10 most populous states are home to half the U.S. population, but their 20 senators make for only 1/5 of the U.S. Senate.
Right.
What do you think it will really take to reform, transform, eliminate the Electoral College?
Well, it would take one thing we don't have right now. We do have some Republicans that govern from character. That's what I mean. And I don't mean to besmudge the others. I'm just saying ones that we see are willing to be independent-minded and maybe put the issue above politics. You need to have a strong Democratic majority, and you need to have a very serious campaign so people understood just what you said. It is nuts that, let's say you're a Republican, let's say you're Trump right now, and you've got 52 votes in the Senate, okay? And yet you can never pass anything, okay? You're the elected president, you've got a majority in the Senate, you can never pass anything because of the filibuster, which is similar to the Electoral College in a sense. So 10 or even eight Democrats could block everything the Republicans are trying to do. And that's wrong. That's been happening much more so recently.
But usually it's not the Democrats, it's the Republicans, right?
Well, usually, but I'm trying to be a little bit
Okay.
In other words, so we'd all understand, we don't want anybody doing it, whatever party you're at. I didn't like it when the Democrats did it under Verdoliak and Burke. I don't like it when the Republicans do it. So, but the Electoral College, we should always remind ourselves, it was a government based on a slave constitution many, many years ago. And we've changed a lot of things in the country and technology, and the Supreme Court has dealt with thousands of issues that have nothing to do with 1786 and 7. Okay. But we need to deal with Electoral College because it's totally unfair. The person who gets the most votes should win, and it shouldn't be this. Now, the only good news, at least for the Democrats at the moment, is by having serious contests in Arizona and Nevada, and now North Carolina, even Iowa, even people talking about Florida and Texas. By having closer races in those states, it's an advantage for the Democrats because now the Republicans have to put money and resources into some states they didn't think they had to. A few years ago, Virginia was a swing state. Now it seems fairly blue. So things change over time. We know the other issues in the election. I think probably the most critical of all happens to be women's rights, particularly reproductive rights, probably the single most dynamic issue in this election.
David, let me try to get you to talk about how you see the election going, and if you were a magician or a wizard or someone who could predict with accuracy, what's your take on where things are at and how they might turn out?
Well, I do worry. I worry because of some of Trump's character problems and so forth. I worried about anything that he might do in the last few weeks of the campaign. But I'd say that the good news for Trump is, despite all of his problems and indictments, et cetera, and convictions, that the bottom line is he's still right in there competitive. Okay. The good news for the Harris campaign is that they've got a ground game. And they're spending more money. I mean, they're raising good money, too. So is Trump, but using money for social media, which is very important nowadays. As I said before, the advantage goes to Trump when it comes to voter suppression. There's polls everywhere, but I will tell you about something that I saw recently. Basically, it was 4 key pollsters, well-known, Nate Silver, The Economist, The Hill, and 538. And all of them were saying, what are the chances? What's your best information, the chances that Harris wins versus Trump? Okay. Nate Silver had it 53 to 43. Okay. 53.2 for Harris, 43. In other words, that's it's kind of like a sweepstakes. Okay. The Economist had 57% for Harris. The Hill had 55 to 45. And again, 538, the polling outfit had 58 to 42. Now, again, we all know that Trump outperformed the pollsters in 20. There's people that support him that don't want to tell people. And there's people that are probably opposing him that don't want to tell people because they're Republicans. They've gotten sickened by him. But they don't want their neighbors to know that. So it's a big question mark. So the key is who delivers the best. And again, not all Republicans are voter suppressionists. Fortunately, some of those are helping us defeat suppression. But I think it's suppression versus a ground game.
Yeah, well, hopefully we got a good ground game. We know that Katie Hogan and a lot of other people from our neighborhood, our ward, and beyond are going to Wisconsin and to Michigan, knocking on doors. And I'd like to ask you that now that you're no longer the biggest vote getter in the county and the Cook County clerk, you're a little bit retired, but like all of us who are retired with a political bent, we're still doing a lot of things. And I'm wondering what you do these days to keep yourself occupied and happy.
Well, if anything, I feel like I've been too busy. And as we get up there in age, Michael, I'm trying to shed a few things, particularly the tasks are not my favorites. So as you may know that I phased out Good Government Illinois, which was a group that I started when I left the clerk's office. And I joined our forces with Reform for Illinois, which is a nonprofit group run by a lot of good people that you know. And they're very good. So I don't have to do as much of the administrative work. I don't have to do the fundraising. I will help them, but I'm not in charge, and that's nice. So I can focus on podcasts. You know, we did a good podcast 2 weeks ago with the Inspector General, which is Inspector General is real dynamo. Deborah. And because there are some things happening on the ethics front. And so I'm glad to see that, working with Matt Martin. So basically, podcasts, do radio shows, try and keep up with the issues as much as possible for an old guy. And then I still have some administrative things, but other than that, just keeping up with the family and the doctor appointments.
David, we'll have you back on whenever you want to come on, or whenever we need a good guest. And when we got some real serious questions about voting and justice in America. Thank you so much, David Orr.
Thank you, Michael.